Thank you very much. Today I will be presenting part of my PhD research, which was conducted together with Kintia Kamilotari, Marielle Arts, and Yvonne de Court. And I will be talking about the effect of having direct sunlight versus diffused sunlight in offices on perceived restoration potential and the experience. So I will directly start with what I mean by restoration. So in environmental psychology, restoration refers to the process of replenishing psychological, physiological, and social resources that becomes depleted through everyday demands of life. Imagine having a stressful day at work, and after work, what would you like to do to recover from stress and relax? Maybe you would like to just spend some cozy time at your home, or maybe you would like to go for a walk outside with your dog. But as you might notice, some environments are better for stress recovery than the others. And these environments are often referred to as restorative environments. And among restorative environments, we have a lot of evidence in the literature that exposure to nature and being in nature has many restorative effects on human, and they help us recover from stress and mental fatigue, and they even improve our mood. And what about indoor environments? We also know that by bringing natural elements indoors, we can increase the restorative potential of indoor environments. And what about daylight? So while we already know that daylight has many benefits through several pathways, its specific restorative effects were remained underexplored in indoor environments, and thus we started our research by conducting a systematic literature review on the restorative effects of daylight. So we systematically reviewed the literature in terms of factors affecting daylighting indoors and their effects on 4 different types of restorative outcomes. We screened more than 2,000 articles, and only 33 of them were eligible for our analysis. And among these articles, 67 unique relationships were included in our analysis between these factors and the type of restorative outcomes. So the results. So this is the results combined, so all outcome types combined all together. And here what we see, we look into general picture that there is evidence on the fact that more presence of or more daylight leads to better restorative effects. But here I want to especially focus on the factor orientation of the opening. And here what we see is that when compared to other factors, we have the biggest agreement in these factors, where rooms with sunlight or sunnier rooms leading to better restorative effect compared to rooms with no sunlight or less sunlight. However, when we look into these outcomes in terms of different outcome types, we can see that most of this evidence is coming from clinical studies. These are very valuable studies, and the results were pretty consistent. However, they also have some limitations, and one of the most important one being that there was lack of control over the confounding factors. And most importantly, the view content. As we already know from other studies, a room with a natural view can also lead to the lower hospital length of stays compared to a room with a built environment. So in the current study, we aim to address this limitation, and we wanted to isolate the daylight effects while controlling for the the confounding effect of view especially. So we wanted to compare the direct sunlight presence to diffuse sunlight, and we also included another condition which includes direct sunlight presence and dappled light, which we thought would lead to even better restorative effect compared to a room only with sunlight, considering it both has sunlight and natural elements in it. And furthermore, we measured visual appraisals and personal differences. So this was an online study with 78 participants, and we used photographs of real office rooms. And this was a 3x3 full factorial within subjects designs with 3 different rooms, all facing east direction, and they were from the same building. So we had the no direct sunlight conditions, which were all photographed afternoon, and the direct sunlight conditions were photographed in the morning from exactly the same spot. And we also created a condition where we combined direct sunlight and dappled light, and this was built by combining the previous 2 conditions and adding an overlay of a real dappled light pattern. And to create the conditions, finally, we made sure that the average luminance over the scenes were equalized across other conditions to control for its confounding effects. So in the procedure, there were 2 parts. In the first part, we only collected data on perceived restoration potential. We first asked participants to recall a time when they felt stressed and overwhelmed by work. And then later on, we asked them to rate each environment, thinking of how much being in that environment would help reduce their stress. In the second part, we asked them again to read the same environments in terms of the giving statements, and these statements included perceived naturalness, perceived brightness, visual appeal, perceived stimulation, and after all, we used these items to run factor analysis to reduce the number of variables into latent variables. And at the end of the experiment, we collected data on connectedness to nature and sensory processing sensitivity to analyze personality differences. In our analysis, we used linear mixed effects models. So for each outcome type, we included light condition and room type as main effects, and plus their interaction term, if only if it included the model fit, plus we added participant as a random intercept to account for the within subjects design. So the results, as we can see in all room types, both sunny and dappled conditions seemed to perform better than the no sunlight condition. And only when we control for the effect of room type, we could see that there was the sunlight condition led to slightly higher perceived restoration score compared to no sunlight, and there were no significant differences between other conditions. In terms of perceived naturalness, this time both sunlight and dappled light conditions led to higher perceived naturalness compared to no sunlight condition. And similar to this one, both sunlight and dappled light condition were appraised more positively. And this was a latent variable comprised of the ratings of preference, attitude, relaxation, and visual appeal. And backing this up, both sunlight, the direct sunlight conditions were rated as less negative than no sunlight condition. And this was also expected. Both direct sunlight conditions were led to higher activation scores. And finally, although the average luminance was equalized across conditions, both sunlight and dappled light conditions were perceived to be brighter than the no sunlight condition. And here, this is the only variable. We found a significant moderating effect of sensory processing sensitivity. And what we see is that individuals with higher sensitivity to environmental stimulation perceive the differences larger than the other individuals. To conclude, so what we found here in this experiment was pretty consistent with what was found in the systematic literature review, although we expected to see bigger differences, but we only saw a subtle increase in perceived restoration when there was direct sunlight presence. And it should be noted that overall, the ratings were really low, And probably this is showing that offices are not really restorative environments. And when we asked them to rate the offices based on this, the ratings were pretty low. However, despite all ratings being low, sunlight still seems to be making the difference. And this was pretty consistent. Both direct sunlight conditions enhanced positive appraisals, and they lead to negative effects. However, there were no benefit of dappled light, and this was contrary to our expectations. Well, there can be several reasons for that. First of it being this condition was constructed by us, but it was not a real dynamic ideal daylight. And the second being our stimuli was static in nature, thus we just lost its dynamic character. Since, as we know from our previous research, that when we compare a dynamic dappled light condition to a control condition, we see an increase in its restorative potential. However, when the comparison was between a static and a control condition, we couldn't see the difference. And what we see is that, this was also in line with the literature, that when there was direct sunlight in the room, it was perceived to be more bright. And this was also because we equalized the conditions in terms of average luminance. However, the luminance distribution on the wall was not the same. And this led to the differences we saw. And we also know that when the luminance distribution on the wall is not homogeneous, this also leads to better positive appraisals. And we also saw that individual differences indeed matter. Well, there were, of course, limitations. So this was an online study, which obviously lacked real life exposure. And our restoration measure was not direct, but indirect, because we asked participants to think of a stressful time and reflect on this one. And our dappled light stimuli was not real, but just constructed by us. So future work, these are some obvious directions for future work, but other interesting ones would be to test the dynamic character of sunlight and sunlight patterns and see the effect would be higher or the same. And maybe the test the effect of sunlight in different cultures or different regions to see that if restoration by sunlight is something built in ourselves, or is it maybe related to the fact that in the northern countries there is lack of it. And to conclude, we already knew that daylight goes beyond illumination, so it shapes our physiology and psychology, and it also provides restorative effects. And among the components of daylight, direct sunlight presence looks like our most powerful tool for enhancing restoration. Thank you very much.